Hi, so in this video, I'm going to look at another way of creating rhythmic bass lines in Ableton Live using an arpeggiator, but not the built-in arpeggiator because it's a little limited. So I'm going to look in Pack's Probability Pack and find the Probability Arp, which is part of a downloadable pack for Ableton Live. Should be available on the Confetti computers. If you're using Ableton on your own, you'll need to download the pack. Let's put this ahead of analog. First off, I'm going to turn off the chord part of things because we're making bass lines. I don't really want chords. And I'm going to stick the ARP on hold. So that means that anytime I press a note, the note will stay pressed down. And for the purposes of this, I'm just going to play one single note on my keyboard, which is going to be a D. So let's get my pattern playing. Okay, so initially it's quite a fast rate. Let's make this a little slower, something a bit more suitable for a bass line. Now what I could do is change the rate here to something like 3/16 or a dotted eighth if you're musically minded, and then what we hear is something a little bit more kind of syncopated and interesting. What I'm actually going to do is keep this on 1/16 and change the gate pattern down here. So these are when the notes appear in the bar, so, or I guess over 8 steps. We can add and remove steps here to create variety and interest in the pattern. Okay, here's where it gets interesting, and there are various parts in Ableton Live where you can change patterns as they're generated probabilistically. So here, for example, I've got an octave control. Let's say every so often I want the octave to go low, so I can set my octave range like this, so that's 0 and that's -1, turn up the amount of probability, and then every so often the octave will go low. Let's say I also wanted to create variety in how the notes are played lengthwise, so I can change the amount of length variation, perhaps not quite that short. Now we can hear each time a new note arrives, the length gets changed. Gets a little more interesting if you play more notes into the sequence. So perhaps I'll play 2 Ds and a C. Previously I set my sound up so that there's glide between notes when they overlap. Because the length is going long every so often, sometimes notes will overlap and I'll get interesting glide patterns going on. That's great. You can do some really interesting stuff with the Probability Arp. But then what? How do you actually make use of that? Well, perhaps what we need to do is create a new MIDI track for our Probability Arp, and then connect that MIDI track to my analog track. So I'm going to move the Probability Arp to this new MIDI track, and then set the output of the MIDI track to analog. with monitoring always in. The results will be the same. Well, if I do that. So having split the two devices on one track and one on another, what I can now do is use the record mode on the analog track to record in some of this pattern as it's playing. So I've got it there written into the track, and then I can repeat it and it'll be slightly less random. So let's take loop off and start recording on my analog track. Took a little bit of figuring out there to get it working, but what we can now see, if I stop it after a few bars, what I can now see is on my analog track is I've got a pattern with all these notes as they were played from the Probability Arp recorded in. I can ignore those two there. And I can then disconnect the Probability Arp from the analog track, and I should be able to somehow play that back. I'm not quite sure why that isn't working, but it should play back. Oh, it's because I've got... That's out of time because Ableton's kicked me out of the session view. Well, a few quirks there, but you can see there that I've managed to record my bass pattern in from the Probability Arp back into a new track.